time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm gonna hop in and get us going. And I know we're a little bit behind, but thank you. And I know that you, those at home cannot see me, and those here, welcome. My name's Kyle. I am the Education Program Coordinator with NOFA New Hampshire, hopping in to help with some hosting and tech stuff, and always a joy when we're hopping here online, but it's great. We can have people at home. We can have people here in person for this workshop today. And I just got a couple things to begin before we turn it over. We always begin with the land acknowledgement, and I want to try and make it so everyone can see. Go back to my. So this conference is presented on land that has been stewarded by Indigenous people since before European colonization. And as we work to heal the destruction caused by colonization, we appreciate your support and solidarity and continued learning. And if you are at home, by all means, you can put it in the chat where you're chiming in from. And if you do know the Native communities that inhabited that land. And we're going to keep going as well and speed through our beginning. And with our theme, we aim to bring to light the ancestral wisdom of Indigenous peoples of the global South, and we celebrate the restorative agriculture is rooted in longstanding cultural practices of Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color. And we hope this conference aims to center equity in our food system, and there are some caucus groups today, so by all means, join the caucus groups today. And there are some great resources available. Let me do this for now. There are some great resources available in different states. We, as NOFA, are in 7 different states, and there are some wonderful things happening in our region. And if you are aware of any others, please, by all means, put them in the chat and share the resource. And we have some great sponsors. I don't know why that doesn't work. We have some great sponsors, Stonyfield, all of these wonderful sponsors who continue to support us year in and year out. And we are appreciative of all of their work. And there are some jobs available in probably multiple chapters. So keep on the lookout for NOFA opportunities to support the team, especially here in NOFA, Massachusetts. And it's time for my presentation. No, it's time for your presentation. Well, I want to begin by saying joining us, everyone is joining us for the 40 acres and a Honda, BIPOC land access, reparations, and the family farm dream. And we are joined in person by Hazel, who comes all the way from Vermont. Montpelier, Vermont. And then we are also joined online by a couple wonderful people, Rachel and Bill, who I am familiar with Rachel, and they do some great work. Rachel with Land for Good, and Bill with NOFA Vermont. So this is for the end. So I'm going to stop this share for now. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Hazel.
Thank you, Kyle. And just want to say good morning to everyone. Greetings. Sending our greetings out to you. Thank you for your time and your efforts spent getting here, attending the conference in general, virtually and in person, and taking the time and the interest to listen. My name is Hazel Adams-Shango. I'm accompanied today by 2 other generations in my family. My daughter Hazel, little Hazel, is here. She's a registered nurse in Vermont. And my grandson is here entering 8th grade, Jonathan Adams. So we're kind of a 3-generational piece today to really round off our interest in the family farm dream. And I think we're ready to start the presentation. And
I'm gonna pull it up for everyone.
And so we're just really glad to be here. I think most folks here in the Northeast Corridor, New England, know about the recent flood events in Montpelier. We were definitely impacted. But I have to say, presenting at this conference was the one thing that kind of helped us push through everything and to be here and not to cancel or not to do a virtual presentation. We drove in last night and we're just very, again, happy to be here. And we really hope that you enjoy the presentation.
Sorry,
No, it's all right.
for some reason,
Share the sound because I think she has video. When you share the screen, like share the sound.
There we go.
I'm just trying to.
So while they're working on that, the 40 acres in a Honda. Actually, the land that we're on right now, that we're leasing, that we're farming and working as a family is located in Wolcott, Vermont.
Okay.
And it's actually a 40-acre parcel, oddly enough. But half of that land is in conservation, 22.5, a little bit over half. We have a river conservation, and you'll see some pictures towards the end of the property. And we have a forest conservation on the right-hand side of the property. And so we go straight through the meadow, 17.5 acres, but we're not there yet. With all utilizing all 17 acres, absolutely not. We're just trying to get through a half acre sometimes in the process. So before I begin the presentation, I have disclaimers. The first is the story you are about to hear is what I call a freedom narrative. So often in African-American history and families, we're often encouraged, even as young people, to read slave narratives. And they really kind of tell in person, one-on-one about their lives and their lifestyles during that enslavement. But I wanted to, this is the beginning of my freedom narrative. I'm 60 years old. Don't know how much time we have left here, me, myself. And so I really wanted to put something forward to the people, to the world, to my children, so that they would remember me and remember the importance of feeling that sense of joy and freedom in their lives. And it doesn't always come from material things. So this is a freedom narrative. The narrative is based upon true events and real people. You're going to meet some of the folks in my family, and you're going to meet some of the folks that are my farm family as well. Absolutely no names will be changed to protect the innocent. If I'm pointing that out, I'm pointing that out. Or if there's a particular position that I feel that needs to be brought attention to, it will be. And this presentation is rated PG-13 for everyone here. My grandson is here, he's 13 years old. He's entering 8th grade, and we talk about these things in our home. So there are, or there may be some points of the conversation or the narrative that you may want to, censor for your children, or you want to take that opportunity as a parent to introduce those topics to your own children at that time. And I think those are my disclaimers pretty much for what's about to come up. And we're gonna go to the next slide. So the overview is 40 acres and a Honda. And so we're looking at BIPOC land access. And that's when I do in my narrative what I call the remembering about the land. And then we're going to talk about reparations a bit. I'm just introducing some concepts because what I found through the pandemic and being online with the younger people group, with my daughter's age group in the 20s and all of that, there was a lot of language I didn't understand, a lot of acronyms, a lot of things going on in the next generation that I just think we don't have to necessarily incorporate into our lives, but we need to seek to understand, seek first to understand and then be understood. And then the last section is the family farm dream. And we call that the healing. That's how we have really come to this point in the 21st century in our family and historically, and how we find healing with the land and learning how to work together as a family and as adults and intergenerationally. Thank you. So we will start with the remembering. Next slide. And so in this remembering, just as our host Kyle acknowledged the indigenous people and made their land acknowledgement, this is where we acknowledge our ancestors and who came before us. In the African American community and in the African-centered community, we're generally like pouring a libation, we're saying ashe, we're saying thank you, and things of that nature. The land that we currently steward in Wolcott is 40 acres, and it is on unceded Abenaki or Abenake, some people say, territory and land. We are making inroads with that particular, there are 4 bands of the Abenaki that I'm aware of in Vermont, and we're making inroads with the particular band where our area in Lamoille County. We haven't made formal, we've had introductions, I've texted the chief, I've done things like that, but we're going to work further to see how we can work together in that interest. And also, I think we're in the next
We
slide, the
are,
remembering.
it's just causing me some technical difficulties for those at home and everything. So now it's working here, but
There we go.
I don't think it's working.
We're still in remembering.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Rachel, are you, 1 second, Rachel, are you seeing anything at home now? Or is everyone seeing stuff at home? Yes, all right.
Excellent. So in that remembering, we acknowledge the indigenous people of this land before colonization. We acknowledge our ancestors who came, we're thinking knowingly, from the continent of Africa and elsewhere. And we're acknowledging any peoples that came before us, your mothers, your fathers, your grandparents. And that's how we're going to begin this story, because it's their story that has been seeded to us in more than one way. We are seeds ourselves, and inside of seeds, and you know if you're growing or you're planting, is actually the past, present, and future, all wrapped up in one, in a seed. It comes from the plant, it previously let off the seed, you're planting it in the present so that you can have food and sustenance or some type of helpful outcome in the future. So the seed is very representative of our remembering. And now we're going to the next slide. And thank you.
Mhm. There we go.
There we go. So this gentleman right here is my great-grandfather, Judge Scipio Africanus Jones. And he was one of the first Black judges in the state of Arkansas. And if we click this first one, there's just a brief video in Elevating Black Stories that'll tell you about how he participated in a land-related issue in the early 1900s. Control and click.
Well, it is showing on my screen, but not our main screen. So
I
we
think
will.
it's a control and click though.
And it's a display. A display is what we're.
But the video we're waiting for is through Arkansas PBS. And it's just a snippet, but it really tells you about his birth in 1863. His mother, Jemima, is my great-great-grandmother. And his father was Jemima's so-called owner, Dr. Sanford Reamy. And you'll see some of the Reamys, some of my cousins at the end as well. We have some photos to show you. Very surprising how we're all interrelated at some point, at least here in North America, to the best of my knowledge. But it's just a very interesting piece. And what it tells about, which is the second link that's there, is a Supreme Court case called Moore versus Dempsey that ended up taking place. So in the early or mid 1900s, 1919, 1920, right before the Roaring 20s, we had something called a Red Summer in the United States of America. And African-American folks were being lynched all across the country, in urban areas, in Chicago, in rural areas like Elaine, Arkansas. And so there we go. And
We're going to attempt.
There we go.
It's trying to get our audio. 1 second for those at home. It's mostly tech stuff.
No worries.
Putting my skills to the test. I'm unsure why it wouldn't play. That's not what I
But
want.
I'm thinking that folks will have access to the presentation afterwards as well. And what the PBS short is just telling you about where he was born, 1863, that he worked on the Moore versus Dempsey. The Moore versus Dempsey case. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. He wrote the habeas corpus brief for that case. He worked with Thurgood Marshall as an NAACP lawyer and a justice lawyer, a race lawyer. And I've had folks and met folks in my hometown of Chicago who've told me, who met my great-grandfather, older people who've gone on, and they said he always came into Chicago with a trunk full of bourbon and he was always on the run. He's just always moving. And oddly enough, my mother and my sisters and we drink bourbon to this day. Like if we're having a celebration or a toast, that bourbon has come down like 2, 3, 4 generations in our family for anything important or any kind of toast that we use. But it's telling you a lot there alongside Thurgood Marshall. Jones won after his death, 1943. That was his last case. He worked with Thurgood Marshall. And there's a post office named after him in Little Rock, Arkansas. He's very well known down there. And that's where we get our connection to land. That's that one side, my mother's side. That's my mother's grandfather. She used to tell us about him all the time. And I was like, yeah, okay. The typical teenager. And as I got older, I started doing much more research. I even went to the Schomburg Library in New York in the 80s. And I asked the reference librarian, have you ever heard of Judge Scipio Africanus Jones? And he was the librarian that helped Alex Haley with Roots. And he says, who has it? And so I was like, overwhelmed. I was like, could you give me all the books? Can you show me? And so we've just been working on that ever since. And that's just a little information about Moore versus Dempsey and the work with the NAACP and what he was doing. But see, the Elaine massacre was a riot, the third paragraph, that began on September 30th, 1919, after shots were fired between white men and black men outside of a progressive farmers and household union. So the sharecroppers were attempting to unionize back in 1919, and they don't know who shot first. I kind of read all the court records and everything. They don't know, but it turned into this huge issue. And we are very much in touch, our family, with Rick Stockley and with the representatives, state representatives in Arkansas, as well as those in Congress. And everyone knows about Scipio. And my last story with Scipio, I used to live in Washington, DC in the 1980s and 90s. And we had the opportunity to spend Earth Day with Bill Clinton and Al Gore, president and vice president at the time. And Jonathan's father was with me, and he was a little boy. And we got to meet and greet and shake hands. And so when I met President Clinton, I said, my great-grandfather is Scipio Africanus Jones. He said, hey, Al, Scipio's her great-grandfather. They know in the South about him being that attorney and that law judge and that chancery judge that was really fighting for the people. So even all the way to the top. And next slide, please.
We are going back to the slides.
Going back to the slide. Let's see. So we've done some remembering there. And next one.
Took us all the way back to the beginning.
And there, and there, we're gonna move forward. We've done our remembrance and we've done the land. So this one is tricky. When we talk about BIPOC land access, one of the things for me, as an African-American woman, and engaged in all my conversations with young people, with the Vermont Relief Collective, with different kinds of groups, the Vermont Women's Land Trust, how up in Huntington, we've had these interesting conversations about what BIPOC is and what land access is and why is it so meaningful. So I had my daughter You're gonna go back.
I-
Because
Yes.
that's actually a chat GPT that's gonna come up. I had my daughter chat GPT. The meaning of the BIPOC acronym. Now, I'm sure everyone who's hit them with it, they may know it stands for Black, Indigenous, people of color. But there's some people who don't. And I never make that assumption. When I'm interacting, whether it's in the farm world, whether it's in the education world, I have a background in public education in New York City, wherever I am, I never make assumptions about what people know and don't know, and what they understand or don't understand, or even if they can read or not. And if I feel that there's some challenge or some difficulty, I said, I'll take up the banner. Oh, let me help you there. This is actually what it says. This is what it is. And so I just wanted to see, because I'm not really a tech person, even though my two sons are, that are not here, John and Kofi, they're both like software engineers and programmers for very large companies that you may be familiar with, and they're just into tech. So this chat GPT, if you click here, there you go. And you'll see my daughter, we recorded it, typing the question. And the question was, what does BIPOC mean? And then to put a second piece in there. What is the origin of BIPOC? Because I didn't know. Everybody was saying BIPOC, BIPOC. I was like, that was never an acronym we used in our community at all. And so it actually, you can click on it just for a moment, it'll stop. But it talks a lot about the inclusion of Black and Indigenous in the acronym. Acknowledges the distinct histories of oppression, colonization, and ongoing systemic injustices. Now, I thought that was interesting. I had heard of people of color. In the 1980s and 90s, they started using POC, well, not the acronym, but actually the phrase, people of color. But that's such a catch-all. It's still not enough for me right now. Just even to say BIPOC, because it seems like it's just the political expediency and the funding expediency, we're just going to put this group of people together instead of identifying all of our individual and lived experiences, African-American lived experiences, Caribbean American. See, they're even internal to different ethnicities and social groups. There are these distinctions that we have internally. And so I just wanted to learn more about BIPOC, and the term BIPOC gained momentum in recent years as a response to the limitations and shortcomings of using terms like people of color. So I'm still individually, I have mixed feelings about that. So I don't know how, these are just things to provoke thought for you, for yourself, to even go and investigate. Just not even listen to me. Go after this, or when you get home this weekend, and just start reading articles or listening to YouTubes or listening to a podcast about different subjects and topics, and see if that can work for you. And we're up to the next slide. So I was trying to unpack BIPOC, and I was trying to unpack land access. And land access, we're going to hear from Rachel Brice in about 15 minutes, and from Land for Good, which is a really important organization that any aspiring or ongoing farmer, gardener, any agriculturalist, anyone who's interested in agriculture, they have a lot to offer, a lot with classes. And they helped us, Mike Gia, a member of Land for Good or an officer there, he helped us when it came to the land access, because we went through the Farm Beginnings class with NOFA Vermont. And so Bill Cavanaugh is going to also be on at the in a few minutes to answer some questions and tell about that class. And in Farm Beginnings, you have several modules. And one of the modules was about land access. And one of the emphasis that all of the guest speakers were putting is, you don't want to be land rich and money poor. Because when you acquire a large property or you acquire property, there is so much financial input in order to optimize that land. So we have access to 40 acres, but 22.5 in conservation. So we're looking at 17.5 straight through the meadow. Field, beautiful field, 6.5 soil. Oh, you just gotta love it because nobody's been there in almost 20 years. And even who was there before were horses. And who was there before was no one again. And so it's had a chance to heal itself, even from the horses, but the horses were part of that biodynamic system that's just out there. The Wild Branch River runs on the left side of the property when you enter, and the Tamarack Forest is on the right. And so when we took the Farm Beginnings class, we were encouraged to create a farmer profile on Vermont Land Link. So it's like, family, African American, I use BIPOC because that was a key word, looking to own, but would like to lease initially, and had this whole little profile. And lo and behold, on Christmas morning, December 25th, 2021, someone, I'll leave him unnamed, John, wrote me back and said, hey, how are you? I have something I think you might be interested in. Just, here's everything. And he's like, here's everything. Here's the map. Here's the this, here's the that. Why don't you go take a look? And I wasn't used to that openness. New York City, I grew up in Chicago, South Side, and then you're just used to this competitive and this push. And it's very difficult to receive the gifts that people are giving you. And that's one thing that Vermont has shown me, and that the farming community has shown me in general, is that you can receive so much from an individual person or group, but you have to be willing and open enough to receive that. And little Hazel and I drove out there after Christmas Day, and we're in the snow, and we're walking through the field and snow up to over our knees. We don't know, we're just kind of out there. And it was beautiful even in the snow. So we said, yes, we'll take that. So all that to say, that's how Farm Beginnings and NOFA Vermont, and then Land for Good, they help you seek so many things, and they help maintain that Vermont Land Link site. So it's all kind of interconnected. Once you get with one organization that you can really relate to, I would say, kind of stick with that and explore and expand into them and what they have. And then they continuously introduce you to other people that can help grow your dream. And so I'm going to go back. So here, and you're going to have access to these links. If you click on, let's click on Latinos. I didn't know whether to use Latinx, Latinos, Latina. I'm confused. And so I'm still trying to learn about all different cultures, what is appropriate, what is respectable. And I'm open to that. So if anyone can tell me what the current word of the group, of the gente, the people are, just, shout out. But if we could click on one of those for the Latinx.
We have, it's just, in order to do your links, I have to close the slideshow.
So don't do that. What you have here, and you need to look it up, is just informational. The United States Department of Agriculture conducts an agricultural census every 5 years. And I used to work for the Census Bureau in the New York region. Very familiar. They study everything, your leisure time, they survey everything. You're hunting, wildlife, fish, it's amazing. So Ag does a survey in conjunction with Census, and every 5 years. So the 2022 agricultural census, the results were delayed because of the pandemic, some other things, but this fall, those results are to be announced. But these are links to the 2017, the last census data, but it's less than, it's 1% now for African American farmers. It's like 0.6% for Asian Pacific Islanders. Say Latinx might be 1.6, 1.7 if my memory serves me correctly, and indigenous farmers just about the same. So where is the majority of this land? And who owns it? And you're hearing a lot about that in the news. And I'm not just talking about European Americans owning it. There are a lot of owners that don't even live in this country or do not identify as Americans and things of that nature. And we really need to kind of keep our eyes and ears open, even in your own individual communities. Who's moving the land? Where is the land? Welcome. Where is the land going and to whom? And you'd be surprised how much information is public information. And it's just about calling the town clerk and things of that nature. Also, if you're purchasing land, it's very important to know the history or the narrative of your land. Who owned it before? What was it in the 1800s? What has it been used for? Make sure that you trace that as well. You're going to see geographical maps and how much slope you have there, and no more than 5 to 7% slope. And you use all these terms. That's where a hill and the slope. But find out the history. You know, knowing your own personal narrative is important, and knowing the narrative of any land you work, whether you own it, whether you're leasing it, whether there's a lease with option to own. Use that period of time to really find out what's going on. Next slide, please. And we're gonna get to our guests. So we can't use any of the videos. Let's try that.
We could try it.
40
We can
acres and a
try it.
mule. Where did that whole thing come from? Because I don't remember learning it in history. So I went to middle school and high school in the 70s. I graduated high school in 1979, and we learned a lot of things in the 70s. But I didn't remember this in particular. I just remember my parents and grandparents talking about it. And I want my 40 acres and a mule. I want my 40 acres and a mule. And I never, as a young person, understood what the big hullabaloo was about. You know, I'm in the 70s, late 70s, 80s. We're just going to disco. We're having a good time. Our generation's all going to college now. And we have access through affirmative action to get into all of these colleges across the United States. I guess not now. And here we go, 40 acres and a mule. I don't know if we have the audio on that.
It's a great question. Let's see, maybe that's going to cause my. All about where we're.
Issues. During
I'm here.
January 1865.
It's on my computer if we're comfortable with that. Everyone's really quiet.
Actually,
I'll screen share for everyone as well. 1 second. Let's see. All right. Everyone's seeing that at home, I'm assuming. Rachel, you can shake your, give me a thumbs up. Great. All right, I'll be quiet.
yeah, because a mule actually comes out of an order that General Sherman issues during the war, January 1865, after his march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah, after the capture of Savannah. Sherman meets with a group of black ministers, basically, in Savannah, and says to them, look, what do you want for your people? And he also says, look, I've got thousands of slaves following my army. It's a problem for the army. What am I going to do? And they say, look, give us land. Let us be free and have land. That's what we need. And Sherman issues this special field order number 15, in which he says, all right, I'm going to take all the land along the coast of South Carolina here, one of the richest plantation areas in the country, and divide it up in 40-acre plots to black families. Black families can now have 40 acres of land here. Just come and get it. And we'll also give you a mule, because the army's got loads of mules and you need, so we'll give them a mule too. That's the origin of 40 acres and a mule. And thousands of black families are settled on Sherman land, as they call it, in the last few months of the Civil War. But later on, Andrew Johnson has them all thrown off.
And here it is. And so now I know what all the elders were talking about when they were saying, I want my 40 acres and a mule. I had no idea when I was growing up.
He just said at the last sentence, he said something about Johnson.
President Johnson took it away from him. Took the land away.
And I only heard part of the audio. Was this specified to a certain area in South Carolina?
Yes, the coastal area.
And then transferred over, other people wanted the same thing, or other people were offered the same thing?
African Americans who were following Sherman said, we want to be free, we want some land. So he offered that southern coast there of the Carolinas that we said, and thousands went. and claim their 40 acres. I don't know whether they got the mule. We got a Honda. My daughter's Honda Civic 2023. That was our mule last season. And we put straw in the back of there and she just fussed, and that's you, Hazel. She was like, this isn't the farm car. This isn't the farm car. I said, it's the farm car until we apply for a loan or we get a grant and we can do something else. But again, you can listen to the link in full once they publish this presentation. And this will be a great help to you just to take it in at your own time. This is a lot of information to put into an hour. And then when I saw the title, what we came out, David from nofamass and I worked on it together. I was like, this isn't gonna make it in an hour. So I promise not to overtalk, Hazel. We're almost there to our guest. So we're gonna move forward. And
9:40.
again, U.S. legislation. There's more, of course, than this, but definitely look up the Homestead Act. And that was an act where you could, well, where it started out, that a white American person could receive 165 acres of land, as long as they could read and write and sign the deed. African Americans or ex-enslaved individuals could not participate in that until like after 1865 and even somewhat after that. But my grandmother and my grandfather did in Mississippi, and they had a homestead on the Mississippi River in Vicksburg. And that's where I spent my summers down south, and they had the chickens and I was afraid to feed them. And, you know, we were sewing clothes and hand washing clothes and items, and I had to go get the eggs. I was like, I'm not touching that. You know, I'm a little kid from Chicago. I'm not really there, but my parents grew up, you know, in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And then World War II happened. They go, my father goes to the war, my mother goes to Chicago to get work with the quartermaster. Those are the people that pack up the supplies for the army. And then when the war's over, they go to a junior league dance and they meet again. He literally carried her books from school. They went to school together. They literally did.
Do
Yes.
you know what year your family acquired this land?
And I haven't gone back yet. I'm still doing a lot of family research and narrative myself. But start looking up legislation. But that Homestead Act, imagine getting 165 acres now. Each one of us, even in this room, let alone irrespective of your cultural background. Would you accept it? Let's see a show of hands. If the government was offering you 165 acres of land next month, you would accept it. No mule, you gotta get your own Honda. Exactly. And so from a political perspective, I do not like that the law did not incorporate everyone or people who could not read. Women could not acquire this. So there is a lot of energy around that. But the idea of redistributing or distributing land, distributing land in a specific way so that everyone could kind of partake and join. Because everybody's not into farming. I don't know if you've ever done that. The only thing you can talk to me about is like farming. If you're trying to talk to me about anything else, it's kind of like, yeah, okay. Let's get coffee, okay. But if you're telling me, hey, I found this new cedar. Hey, I found this, I found that. I'm with you 100%. I'm just farm obsessed. What can I say? We're going on, moving on.
You're 9.
I'm back, I got it. So now we get to the knowing. We're just gonna go through these slides very briefly. We have to figure out the facts of the case. We're gonna move to the next slide. And so this is the bottom line, and this is the sensitive part, and that's why it's PG-13. I'm speaking for myself and the conversations I have with my children and my grandson. I am not speaking for an organization, political party, or anything. This racial trauma issue is a big issue. That's what the thing is all about. Well, that's what the reparations thing is all about. Because it's this ongoing piece, this ongoing onslaught of someone looking at you strangely like, why are you here? And you just want to be here. You don't even, you're not even like the aggressor or anything. And people don't always necessarily walk up to you and shake your hand. like you would see someone else, or on the job, you're working so hard to get ahead, to become a supervisor or something, and you're wondering about this person that doesn't even do their job on a regular basis. But I understand that there are social hierarchies and relationships that do exist within large societies. You're fooling yourself if you're thinking that it doesn't. And I raised my children that way. It's not like, don't fight the power, or don't, this is not this. This is what exists. You make the decision yourself. I've made my choice of what I'm going to stand up for. I'm going to stand up for young people. I'm going to stand up for what's right. Now I'm with the land. And you make your own choice in the end. But this racial trauma refers to the emotional impact of the stress. So you're not even talking financial, but it has financial consequences. Because if your headspace isn't right, and you're constantly looking over your shoulder, is this person gonna hurt me? Am I in the wrong place? Am I in a sundown town? Can I have a drive through the country? If you had to worry about that every day of your life, and then everyone who was in your family for 400 years had to worry about that, you'd be a hot mess. This is what we think you would just be over it. And so racial trauma can refer to a specific incident of discrimination or something ongoing. And we're going to the next slide. And this is where the knowing about reparations comes in. There are the harms. Racial trauma ends up causing financial, emotional, and even physical harm to people or person. This time frame that we're looking at in the United States, at least in North America, 1609 in the African-American community seems to be that start date. So we're already into 400 years. I think in 1609, there was a sailor's log that said 20-some Africans were brought over, I think it's to Virginia, to Roanoke or somewhere. And that was like the first recorded. I'm sure there were transactions before, but that one was actually recorded in a sailor's log. And then where we want to get is to the reparations. My personal opinion, you can't repair any of that. That was done. All the harm, all the this, all the that, all the taking of land, all of that was done. But what we can do is try to forge something new for the future and for our grandchildren. If you're 60 plus right about now, just saying that, we are set in our ways. We have a certain worldview. It doesn't mean that we're not willing to change, but we're kind of set in our ways. My 25-year-old daughter, spelling folks with X and BIPOC and whatever, everything else, every acronym you can think of, very much into that world. My 13-year-old grandson, just want to do the game and maybe go to the 8th grade dance. And so you have these generations of understanding this interpersonal relationship that you're having. And so reparations can help heal your family. It can produce some level of equity and security. And it involves internal and external repairs. You got to repair the inside and the emotional, as well as the external. And this last one, and then we're going to turn it over to Rachel and then to Bill. And the next. So we require restitution for the harms and atonement for the behavior. So it's the actions and it's the behavior as well. And only we ourselves can make ourselves whole again. It's not anything the United States government is going to do by giving us $300,000 and say, this is repair for 400 years of slavery. That doesn't do it. So I've asked my friends, and so they're talking about this. How about taking out of the Constitution that Black people were 3/5 of a person? How about that as a place to start? It doesn't even have to do with money in one sense, but it does. Everything is political and economic. But how about that? Just taking that out, letting me know, letting me know that even though that was a way you were thinking before, you are not thinking it now this way. We're going to hold that question for just a second. And I'm going to flip one more time, because this guy in California, here are some examples of reparations that are already going on in the United States. California has organized a calculation by your age and the number of years you lived in the state, and some other things for the financial. But I'm talking about repair in other ways. I'm talking about my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren not having to pay any federal income tax for the next 100 years. I'm talking about debt relief. This is what we're talking about. And I don't know if it's the next one, but a representative, next slide, please. I'm sorry. A part of the healing. The representative in California, and I'm going to leave it at this part. I was listening to NPR, I don't know whether anyone heard it last week. He said, if you can inherit intergenerational wealth, then you can inherit intergenerational debt. And the debt is owed for 400 years of uncompensated labor. And that's why he's saying to all the young people and Generation Z, X, and AA, no, you weren't there. But your great-great-great-grandfather was there, and that's why you're sitting in the house on the hill, and I'm down in the flood zone. So if we can pass on the wealth, we pass on that debt as well. And we have to find ways to work together to reckon that. I'm not saying there's any kind of quick fix, clearly there isn't. It hasn't been for some time. We're trying different efforts. We're pulling back on different efforts now with affirmative action and things of that nature, but we all need to take a different look inside ourselves. That's all I'm saying. I'm starting with the woman in the mirror. And how do I live my life on a day-by-day basis in a more just and organized way so that I'm not harming people intentionally or unintentionally to the best of my ability. I'm trying to learn how to share and work collectively. I'm not a good collectivist except with my kids. I don't really want to do all of that in the community. And so the healing starts with, we're just going to click through the family. And these are all my people. This is my son Kofi, my son Jonathan. Kofi's a software engineer. Jonathan is a programmer. And what's that? Cloud architect. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would just make sure you're
Oh,
a little
yeah,
closer.
that's my mother as a child in the middle. And her mother died when she was 6 months old. And her mother was the daughter of Judge Scipio Africanus Jones. So Judge Jones had Hazel, and Hazel had Hazel, and Hazel had Hazel, and Hazel had Hazel. She's a 4th generation Hazel, and if she has children, she will name her child Hazel. Either gender. Hazel's a good name for boys or girls in there. These are my nieces from my sisters. We just have a wonderful family. This is my mother at her end of life journey. I provided her with help at home. So we're all kind of working in a different way on that farm for different reasons. There's my grandmother that had the homestead. And that's my father on the left at this dinner table here. And there's my grandmother, Mary Miles, that had the homestead in Vicksburg. And she came, I think, for that holiday. And clicking through. And so now our farm, now today. So the healing for us comes through working with the family and loving one another and loving ourselves and respecting ourselves enough to be willing and open to grow with each other. Literally grow in the ground and grow and continue to grow as a family. I thought, hey, once the last kid gets out of school, out of college, I'm home free, Zoom. That was May 2019 when she graduated from nursing school. And what happened by March 2020? Pandemic. So my empty nest time, I feel robbed. And then they said, Mom, we don't want you in New York alone. Come on up to Vermont and be with us. 2 of my 3 children live here. And now the 3rd child, Kofi, is moving this summer, so by September. So we really all will be on the farm and not just the silent partners and the boys put in the cash for us and we bootstrap. But this is our first year, upper left. And to the right of that are some starts. We have a wonderful farm mentor in David Hartshorn and his partner Amy Tedesco, and they're at Hartshorn Farms in Waitsfield. Now I'm giving my shout outs now. Peter Forbes at Knoll Farm in Waitsfield. Giving a shout out to our custom hire guy, Dave in North Wolcott. This young man here who did our first plot. This is the first part of a 3 plot, 17.5 acres. Aubrey, he's doing Aubrey Cabot. He's doing regenerative, right, horticulture and landscaping. And I think he's in Peacham, in that area somewhere. That's me being old, and you know. And trying to put something there. I don't remember. This is a beautiful piece. The fourth picture on the right, we just 3 days before the flood. We had the guy through the sponsorship of the owners, so-called owners of the property, to build an access road, and he put in a huge culvert that just saved the day. Even is that NRCS came out to visit us after, because we couldn't get to the property, just to check on the property. And I said, oh, we're so surprised. He just did beautifully. Everything around you is, and I was like, hey, just keep shining on us. And so other people have called and asked us to open up a second field, which we're going to do, and grow some more beets, some more roots vegetables, some more carrots, put it in. And that's Hazel and I, and again, transplanting, and that's a picture of Beverly Ann, the blue Honda. She was actually in an accident in May, totaled, but Hazel was unscarred, unscathed, and we're very grateful for that. But that Honda got us through 2 years, and that first year of actually doing farm school and farm education. So that's the other piece. If you want to expand your gardening, if you want to expand what you're doing with your property right now, educate yourself, whatever your modality is. If it's listening to books, if it's attending workshops like this, if it's joining a smaller group, like a Vermont Relief Collective or a NOFA, and going to a few workshops. They have some wonderful workshops this month as part of farm education with NOFA in Vermont. So I'm going to go to one, even though I'm displaced from my home. There's some kind of toxic dust in the back, in the parking lot, and it goes on. I have no propane tank, so I'm more concerned about winter is coming than right now. I'm staying with my son down in New Hampshire, and we're just kind of, making it work for right now. And I think we're at the end. And farm friends. All right, Rachel, you're on. Please tell us what you do with Land for Good and how you know me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's sound check.
I think we're okay, which is.
You can hear me?
I can, but let me get it so it's situated on the screen for everybody and they can see you too.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to see the room if that's
Yeah, I can do that too. I can turn it around. So, all right, we're seeing you. And
hey, there's everybody.
there's
Hey, everybody.
people.
So nice to see you. Hazel, thank you so much. It was really lovely to hear more from you. And I really appreciate the invite. So thank you so much. We'll talk more later. Hi, everyone else. My name is Rachel Brice. I'm Program and Development Manager at Land for Good. Land for Good is a small nonprofit. We specialize in farmland access New England wide. We work with 3 main audiences. I'm going to focus on one, but I'll briefly tell you about the others. We work with farmers who are seeking land. So folks who are in Hazel's position or were in Hazel's position. We also work with farmers who are preparing to transition out of their farm business for whatever reason. So maybe they're retiring, maybe they're ready to do something else. Many of the people who are in that position haven't had the time or capacity to make a plan for succession and transfer of their land and their business. So we help with that. And we also assist people who own land and have enough to share with farmers. So these may be people who are farming themselves and have extra, or people who aren't farming. There are a lot of non-farming landowners living in New England. This is increasing every year. It really had a sharp uptick during COVID. So we work with those folks to help them find ways to make their land available for farming. And so those are 3 primary audiences, but the way I met Hazel was through one of the programs that I lead called Acquiring Your Farm. It usually runs in the late winter through early spring. It's a 7-week series. It's specifically intended for people who are seeking land. Ideally, these are folks who have had at least a year of farming experience. But we've had people who are at that stage, 1 year of farming experience and ready to go. And we've had people who have been farming for 10 or more years. The purpose of the course is to really help participants walk through in a pretty interactive way. There's homework to walk through all the steps that are really important to consider as you're pursuing land. And so those include questions like, are you interested in leasing? Do you think you want to buy? We try to help people walk through their finances in a responsible way. We have an entire session devoted to making space for safe conversations around justice and equity issues in land access. So if you're interested, I encourage you to reach out, and I will put on the screen the contact information for Land for Good, as well as my personal email. And I also want to mention that in addition to Land for Good, while we are essentially one of the oldest farmland access organizations in the nation, we are certainly not the only ones. Every state in New England has community-based and BIPOC-led farmland access-focused organizations. So I really encourage you to do some searching. If you have questions about who's available in your state to talk to, please reach out, and I'm happy to help with that. So hopefully I can share my screen real quick. So if you're interested, you can find Land for Good online. Our website is landforgood.org. We're also on all the major social media platforms. Feel free to email us, info@landforgood. We'll reach our admin assistant, Collie. She's amazing. Or you can reach out to me directly. I'm really happy to answer questions about anything related to farmland access. And please also spread the word. Tell other folks about us too. Thank you so much. And Hazel, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel. I really enjoyed the class.
Now, Bill, and by the way, for everybody, we are going past 10, as you can tell. I think we're going to try to end it around 10:15 latest. Next workshop is until 10:45. I think it gives us some good time. So go ahead, Bill.
All right, I am going to try and be quick because I know probably everybody's got a little bit of questions. I'm gonna truncate a little bit. I have so much that I want to say. I think Hazel's presentation was amazing, and I just have like 1,000 rambles that I want to go on. But my name is Bill Cavanaugh. I work for NOFA Vermont. In my work, I'm a farm business advisor. So my sort of like day-to-day work is very sort of like financial based, very like business planning based, a lot of numbers and spreadsheets. But one of the hats I wear is that I help out with our Farm Beginnings program. So our Farm Beginnings program is a year-long sort of learning, I won't say learning experience, but it's, you know, year-long learning experience that basically runs as like a classroom portion, October through March. Since COVID, we've gone to a sort of a hybrid virtual session. And that kind of classroom portion really covers soup to nuts business planning for early stage farmers. You know, we start from a sort of a skills assessment and goals setting, really look at like holistic farm planning, and then move sort of, you know, along the spectrum, you know, marketing, enterprise analysis, budgeting, and touch a little bit on land access. So one of the things that we do is we tend to partner with folks like Land for Good or the Vermont Land Trust, Vermont Land Link, you know, all who can sort of really speak to that particular very important piece really well. So, and I think that really worked very well for Hazel too, just having, you know, outside support on land access. So, yeah, and then when our classroom portion wraps up, we do farm visits. So we try and get folks out to actually see working farms, take their sort of business plan that they generated over their time working through the classroom education and see sort of how that looks on a working, established farm. So, our goal with Farm Beginnings has always been very much to sort of meet people where they are, kind of give them, the tools that they need to get a farm up and running and understand sort of, who are the key folks that they can work with in the state. What are the skills they need to develop, where they might fit into the marketplace. And, really it's kind of then up to the farmer to pick it up and run with it. You can all probably guess that Hazel picked it up and ran with it. Hazel and little Hazel were both in our course, and, we're sort of I don't want to say favorites. We don't have favorites, but if we did have favorites from that particular cohort, they were definitely standouts. So yeah, and I will just say too, our particular program, because of our grant funding, is limited to Vermont, but the Farm Beginnings course as a whole is actually implemented by several different organizations. There is one in Hudson Valley of New York, which I think is open to New York and Massachusetts residents. And then MOFGA in Maine also runs a Farm Beginnings as well. And I can't say if I could speak directly to like New Hampshire. But there's definitely some options. And I think, if you are sort of in the greater New England area and you're looking for this sort of education, you can certainly reach out to me, one of your local NOFA chapters. Usually somebody would be able to connect you with that. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking there, because I do think probably it'd be a good idea to get to questions, but I'm happy if anybody has any questions for me, happy to answer. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, Bill. And I think we're gonna wrap up. Cal says.
We have some time for some questions. I think we'll try and do a hard cap at 10:15, which gives us like 5-7 minutes. Do you want to call on people who have questions?
Does anyone? Yes.
I'm curious what happened to your family homestead.
Oh, so
And I just want to ensure, Rachel, did we hear that were you able to catch that on the speaker? So the question was, what happened to your family homestead?
In Vicksburg,
to Hazel.
Mississippi. So my grandfather passed away, and he actually built that house, and he built the car they had, and he could not read, but my grandmother was the reader for that community. And so my father lived in the same community, but not on the hill. He lived in Dabney's Bottom. My grandmother passed away in the early 70s, and my mother sold the property to an attorney, a local attorney there. And then the power company bought it from them, the electric company down there. And now it's like some kind of huge thing, not a casino, but something on that Natalie and Pearl corner. They had prime property on hillside property from the Mississippi River. But my mother made her choices too. She was the parent of 3 children. She lived in Chicago, which was 1,000 miles away from where the property was. There was no one that was really available in our family immediately to live on the property. So it was sold, and it was sold by choice, not by pressure. She just felt she could not keep an eye on that property long distance. And I think, and they never told me this, but I think my parents endured so many things down there in the South. They were born in 1925 and 26. So they were part of Jim Crow rules and segregation. My dad was in the Seabees, he's a veteran. And he had a bronze medal and a victory medal. He was in Iwo Jima. He never said that once. We didn't find that out. I didn't find that out as his child until after he had passed away and my mother had given me his wallet. So that's why I'm encouraging everyone here, look into your family history and start recording the narrative as soon as possible. Yes. Yes, sir.
This may be too big of a question in terms of time we have, but I'm just curious, Rachel and Bill, what they see today as current threats and opportunities for land access. It seems like the pandemic has created some new threats to land access, and I'm just curious in the work that you do, what your opinion is on that.
Bill, would you like to go first?
Yeah, and I can give my perspective sort of from what we're seeing up here in Vermont, and that is a big question, and I think any one of us could probably talk at length on that. I think you know, one of the large threats that I think we're seeing up here is just sort of the rising cost of land. You know, it's really in there's, again, we get a million factors we could really parse through on that, but I think, you know, post-pandemic especially, we saw a real acceleration in folks who are sort of like, well, I just got to get a piece of land in Vermont and hold on to it, and you know, all of a sudden, you know, the price for ag land has really skyrocketed. So that's where we've worked really hard to partner with organizations who are able to, you know, help foster connections between landowners and tenants, help work through financing. A lot of my work is running numbers for folks to sort of say, like, you know, can I afford this piece of land, or can I get a mortgage for this? So yeah, to me, that's probably the biggest threat we're seeing.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback onto that. Farmland in New England has always been some of the most expensive in the nation, and it has really spiked quite dramatically since COVID, with folks coming in from elsewhere and purchasing up farmland that they don't intend to farm. And then that's also combined with many beginning farmers, which is defined by the USDA as 10 or fewer years of experience farming. But even people with a year or two who are really wanting to get into farming as a livelihood are often young farmers, which means they're coming in with very little capital, most of them, and student loan debt. And farming isn't considered a public service legally, so they're not even available for public service loan forgiveness on their student loans. So it's a pretty complicated system of problems. I would say that one of the biggest things that New Englanders can do to help address it directly is if you are an owner of farmland, or if you are neighbors to an owner of farmland, or if you know people who own farmland that they have extra of, encourage them to find a way to share it with farmers. It doesn't mean they have to give it away, but they could share. So that's what I have to say about that. Thanks for the question.
And I think they're saying we have time for one more question, and we'll definitely be here after if you just want a one-to-one. But yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask if anyone has worked with undocumented farm workers who wanted to land owners, what the areas.
So the question was if anyone has worked with undocumented workers and getting access to farm land.
So one thing I will say for us, for the Flying Buffalo, is we've had we're educating ourselves now as a family, because farm worker housing is my concern at this particular point. And I'm wondering if some of that 40 acres could be used for stable housing for farm workers. Housing is and that's that land access is so important to stability of family, stability of yourself, and just being able to realize or visualize your dreams, or having that security in that space. So we're looking at that if we happen to acquire the land in a transaction over the next 2 years, which is anticipated, that maybe we'll create a space that addresses that. And I'll let Rachel and Bill take a shot.
Anything to add to that question, Rachel or Bill?
Just that there are certainly organizations who do direct work with folks that don't have legal documentation and are here as farm workers. A lot of people who are here as farm workers actually do have legal permission to be here, but it's a sensitive subject, and people don't always want to disclose their legal status with paperwork. I think it's about the answer I can get.
Yeah, and I don't have much to add other than just sort of echoing Hazel's point about farm worker housing, is huge for everybody. So yeah, absolutely some need for that.
Housing in general, sorry, I'll be quick, but is a big challenge for also people seeking land too. A lot of, especially beginning farmers, don't live on the land they farm. I think Hazel's in that position also, and housing is also very expensive. So that's another piece of the puzzle. Is helping people find ways to live on or near their farms that is affordable.
Absolutely correct.
Well, Hazel, Rachel, and Bill, do you want to say anything in closing before I just say a couple last things?
I would just like to thank everyone for being here. This is kind of like my swan song kind of thing. I think I want to dig in really deep these next 5 years and educate myself about soil science, about the land that we do have access to, and transmitting more skills, transferring more skills to my children and my grandsons. And I'm going to work on the farm worker housing thing. But I'm just eternally grateful to each and every one of you, because this is time in your life. These hours, these minutes are part of your life. And I do respect that. And I hope that you found some joy in our narrative as a family and some hope.
Awesome. I'm guessing Bill and Richard are staying muted. So I was just going to say in closing, I'm not going to throw up the slide just for time and trying to find it and get it up. But one of the last things was there is an auction. So don't forget some great auction items. So make sure you don't forget that. And the next workshop begins at 10:45. And thanks everybody for your time. Appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel.
Thank you, always. We'll be in touch.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Go this way.